So I think we're off. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Enterprise Ireland UK's Cybersecurity Market Insights webinar. My name is Sarah McNabb. I'm Market Advisor here in our London office, looking after digital technologies and focusing on cybersecurity. I'm based here in London, where it's a very mild 32 degrees, so you can probably see my fan going off in the background. So yeah, I'm delighted I chose today to do this webinar. And I'm joined by founder and CISO, Mr. Thom Langford. Welcome, Thom.
Hello, thank you. And yeah, 34 degrees. It's the hottest day of the year at the hottest time of the day, so perfect for a webinar indoors, right?
Optimal time. So we might quickly. Oh, I'm on mute, I believe. Oh, I've just gotten a message. Can people hear me okay? Sorry. Oh no, I've just gotten a message to say that people, can you hear me? Oh goodness, can you hear me okay, Thom?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead still. Sean, if you can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, apologies. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If you can't, please post in the chat bar if you can sign language. So anyway, we might start off with a quick poll just while the last few people are trickling in, just to get everyone's kind of brain juices flowing. I've pre-cleared this question with Thom before I ask it. But I just want to know how many of you have heard of Thom before?
Yeah,
so,
who the hell is Thom?
So please vote.
Oh, it doesn't let me vote. That's terrible.
You're skewing the results. Okay, still collecting responses. I'm delighted with Amazon's quick turnaround for their delivery. I have to say, I ordered the fan on Tuesday and it arrived yesterday, so it came right on time.
Just in time.
Okay, right. So we're collecting responses, and
okay, I'm going to be intrigued on this.
Okay, so unfortunately 0% are the biggest
What?
fan.
I hate you all.
A fifth have come across you before, which is a nice number. Half of you haven't, and then a 29% Thom who. So
well, I'm going to cancel my holiday to Dublin now for sure.
So yeah, we have quite a fresh audience here, which is great. For those of you who haven't heard of him, Thom has decades of cybersecurity and CISO experience, both internationally and in the UK. And Thom is former global CISO of Publicis Groupe, which is the third largest communications group in the world. Here he managed all things information security, compliance, and business continuity. And previously, he had roles in PwC, Sapient, and even BBC Comic Relief. So expecting a few jokes throughout. And Thom's since gone on to found his own security advisory business, TL2 Security, which focuses on the virtual CISO and business alignment. So yeah, Thom, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just a pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to this. And thank you all for your questions that arrived up front as well. Very helpful and insightful.
Yeah. So yeah, we had loads of questions in, and thank you so much to everyone who has shared their questions. It really shaped Thom's presentation. And throughout, if there's any questions you have during Thom's presentation, please do pop them in the questions box, and we'll be sure to answer them. If you would like to be kept anonymized, just say so at the start, and we won't mention your name. So the UK is a really important export market for Irish companies, and even despite Brexit, it still continues to be the #1 export market for Enterprise Ireland clients, which is great. And it's expected that from 2018 to 2019, that digital technologies exports grew by double digits, which is really, really impressive to see. And I think the UK cybersecurity landscape is a really interesting space, and it presents really great opportunity, but also it's a really competitive market, and it's quite saturated. So I might do one more poll before we kick off with the presentation to see how well you know the UK cyber market. So poll number 2 is what is the UK cybersecurity market valued at? So
I'm going to be upset if people know the answer to this more than they knew the answer to the one before.
So please vote. Okay, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. Okay, so most of you got it right. It's actually valued at 8.3 billion, which is a 46% increase from 2018, which is a really impressive figure. I couldn't get over how big it was. Obviously, COVID is going to have a negative impact on those figures. There's no doubt about it. But equally, I do think that this pandemic and the rapid global shift to working from home has kind of accelerated the adoption of cyber, and it's really shifted from a reactive to a proactive industry as companies are really kind of rushing to ensure employees' personal devices are protected and kind of home network secure. I recently came across an article from Forbes that stated that in a post-COVID world, cybersecurity will be as critical as internet access itself. Would you agree with that statement, Thom?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, it's only just been recognized now that internet access is almost a fundamental human right, because of the access it grants you to the basics of life. But I think it is, because the analogy I use, it's a bit like a country where you've got sort of great motorways, but no emergency services, your cars don't have seat belts, there's no airbags, etc. And so it's great at first until suddenly you can't drive on the motorways because they're littered with crashed cars and accidents, and they're not maintained, etc. So I think the cybersecurity element of it is really important to ensuring that it's maintained to a level of hygiene that it can still be trusted, and that the integrity of the internet is there in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Right, well, I'll let you kick off, and yeah, if anyone has any questions throughout, please pop them in. And I've just noticed your top as well. It's brilliant. It is too hot.
It is. It was either this t-shirt or my Brexit refugee t-shirt, one or the other.
Good choice. Right, I'll leave you kick it off, Thom. Thanks a million.
Okay, thank you. Whoops, remote control not working already. There we go. So I've sort of subtitled this talk, when does it all go back to normal? We're talking about opportunities and challenges in the, for the Irish cybersecurity business in the UK market. Well, now's probably the toughest time to get into it, potentially, given quite how mad things are at the moment. So we're breaking this down into the 4 sections that you've seen. I'm going to be spending about half of the next sort of 20-25 minutes on the first 3 parts, and then about a 10+ minutes or so on the last section. But what I'm going to start off with is really what's happening right now within our market. And I'm going to start that with a question that I've seen, and perhaps many of you have seen on the various social medias. I saw it on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc. But who is it that has led the digital transformation of your company? Your CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19? And I think for a dramatically large number of companies, the shift to digital, remote and flexible workforce working within your company is certainly driven by the current pandemic. And it doesn't matter how much of a good game that your CEO or CTO or whomever talked, it took something like this to actually produce a large amount of transformation within our workplace. And that's really important, because we've fundamentally shifted, not just in Ireland or the UK, but across the world, basically, as to how we're working. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and he said, we've already made the decision to close 2 of our 5 offices in the UK, purely because we've realized that we can work from home. So when we're coming into this market, just realize that there are some fundamental shifts that are that are happening in the UK. Very much the same elsewhere, but certainly, being cognizant of those is important. What is not happening right now, as you've probably gathered, is a surplus of money being thrown around, right? The budgets at the best of times in the cybersecurity world, although they were always being talked up, were never really as big as they needed to be, or we as CISOs wanted them to be. And that's especially true now for two reasons. And the first thing is what I've seen as a shift in the last few years was for any sort of publicly listed companies who had to report to the street on a quarterly basis. Actually, that quarterly reporting plays havoc with internal budgets. And the reason for that is if results aren't where they need to be at the end of a quarter, then changes will need to be made to normally the G&A, the general administration budget, of which cybersecurity is part of. And so what I found was certainly over the latter few years of when I was working for a company like this was that if you didn't spend, the majority of your budget in the first 6 months of the year, it would get removed afterwards because trying to, increase profits, and report into the street. And so it doesn't matter how cast iron your budget was, you would still have to make cuts. So that was the first part. And the second part, obviously, is with the pandemic, cash flow is king. Can't tell you the number of clients or the number of companies that I've spoken to who are purely saying we're spending nothing that we don't have to keep the lights on because we don't know how long this is going on, and we need to maintain cash flow. If I purchase a product X from a vendor, that might mean I have to let go of 2 people because our budgets are simply inflexible. And so what that means is that CISOs and organizations as a whole are not looking strategically right now. The reason for that is obvious. It's short-term thinking. It's trying to get through the next few months. But that means that if your product is a large part of a large multi-year implementation or part of a strategic objective, chances are, if you've already started, it's going to slow down, and if you're waiting in the wings to start, it's going to be delayed. That decision is going to be delayed probably until the end of this year, if not later. And that's because we're doing more of this. We are just reacting. We're reacting to what's happening in front of us. Again, cash is king. We're trying to reserve and maintain the cash flow as best we can to ensure that there is a business at the end of it when we come out of the lockdown. I mean, the economic figures themselves, which I'm not going to quote here, are dire enough as it is. We need to, many companies are just ensuring that they can hold on longer than the virus does. But what this does for me is that as a, if I was a CISO or as an ex-CISO, is that when I am talking to vendors, because things have to continue, when I am talking to vendors, I really need to hear the cost versus value equation. Cost is one thing. Cost is something that I can very easily take off my budget, understand where it leaves me, etc. Value is a really important element of this. If value is cost minus benefit, benefit minus cost, I should say. Value is benefit minus cost as an equation. Understanding what that value is vital. So being sure that you have a real value-based proposition before you start talking to any CISOs or any purchasing organizations, making sure you really understand the value of it. And that's going to be primarily financial, but there will be many other aspects that you can draw in. For instance, access to greater wider markets, compliance to standards that allow you to maintain governmental contracts, etc., reduction of internal costs. So for me, the key thing at the moment as to what's happening now is it's a very challenging market for the medium to long term. So we really need to focus on the value part of this equation. So let's move on to what could possibly go wrong. What has been the impact of COVID-19 and Brexit? What we're seeing, and what I've seen, we saw this in 2008 and in virtually every other recession, is companies are consolidating their vendors. They're consolidating their vendors to ones that can deliver solutions from soup to nuts, A to Z, however you like to put it. If you're one of those large vendors that can do that, that's great. You're in a great position to either stay as an approved vendor or to become one. If you're not, that's going to be quite challenging. If you've got a very specific solution, if your main product offering is a very specific solution, that's going to be very difficult to maintain your position as a vendor for many organizations. And I think what's going to result out of this is you're going to be looking around for some unforeseen partnerships that you might not have considered before now. So that if you can bring 5 or 6 different companies together to form effectively a coalition that you can go to market with, you've probably got a better chance of getting into certain organizations as a result. Channel partners may help here as well. Of course, they're kind of like partnerships in a multi product partnerships in a box, as it were. But look at how you can leverage other companies in your space and similar size so that you can go to market as a larger end-to-end organization. Now, this is not something that hasn't been done before. I can tell you that, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. But certainly in my days in the marketing agencies, etc., it was very common to bring together multiple agencies to form a brand new legal entity that would go to market for a very specific company or a specific industry, even if that meant going into that legal entity with competitors, because work is work is work. It doesn't matter who you're doing it with. So this is perfectly possible, and it's something that I think certainly the smaller organizations amongst us, we need to be looking at to ensure that actually we can go toe to toe with some of the larger companies. The other thing that I think we're going to be facing, or you're going to be facing as sort of new entrants to the market, or even smaller entrants to the market, as it were, is complying to new standards. And I mean this in a couple of different levels. Firstly, security standards. Security standards help make buying decisions frictionless. And the reason I say that is right now, security teams are under pressure. They have very little, they'll have fewer resources, etc. They can't afford the time, effort, and money to be constantly vetting and doing third-party security assessments and risk assessments of their vendors. They need people who they can trust out of the box. They're not going to be investing time helping an organization meet a certain standard. If you don't meet that standard, you're out of the running potentially, even though you might have a very, very good product. And these standards could be anything. So, the global one that springs to mind, ISO 27001. Everybody understands it everywhere. There's obviously other standards. It depends on your marketplace. So, if you're working in hitting North American markets, it would be HIPAA and PHIPAA for the US and Canada, PCI in any kind of financial transactions. UK specifically has its Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus standards. These were created by the government, by the NCSC, and are a prerequisite to any government contract now. And a lot of smaller companies are taking it on because it's based on ISO, and it's like ISO light, aimed at anything from one-person companies up to medium-sized organizations. So look at those as a potential way of reducing your friction to getting a purchasing decision. The other standards that you can think about is anything that allows you to make your buying process easy. If there's something that stops in the way of allowing somebody to hand money to you, that's going to, as I said before, cause friction. People will just lose interest very quickly. There's a very good example from a company that I have no personal affiliation with, but I hold up very highly, which is Canary. They're the folks that make the ThinkSt Canary device. Now, if you go to canary.tools, this is a site that is very much built with the buyer in mind. With a few clicks, you can generate your online quote, and then that will automatically generate your, allow you to generate a purchase order number, etc., to provide them. If you can do anything that actually allows you to streamline your buying process, make it as simple as possible, now is the time to do it. If there's any sort of complicated manual processes in there, time to cut those out. The other part to bear in mind on behalf of buyers is that there's going to be a lot of reliance, for the same reasons of resources, time, effort, and money. There's going to be a lot of reliance on the analysts like Gartner, Forrester, etc. Now, there's nothing wrong with these analysts, and they're an important part of our environment, but everything has to be taken in context. Many times these analysts will do paid for pieces by organizations, by software vendors, hardware vendors, in order to get their product pitched as well as possible. The Gartner quadrant, the Forrester wave, etc., all those things, they're great visually, but what do they actually tell you about the tools that are that they're trying to focus on and demonstrate? Make sure that as best you can that you are, if not placed well in the by the analysts, and I believe that's in the top right of Gartner, and I don't remember on Forrester, but that if you don't get placed there automatically, that you have a very good reason why, and you actually embrace that, so that when somebody talks to you about, well, Gartner don't put you in the top right, you know exactly why and what that means for you, and more specifically them as a buyer. Because again, using something like Gartner and Forrester is a shortcut at a time with limited resources that allows people to make certain decisions, and you need to make sure you're playing on a level playing field in that front. More positively though, let's look at what could possibly go right. What are the future opportunities, threats, growth areas? What are the things that you can do to actually change your fortunes moving forwards? Excuse me. One of the first things I would suggest is take a long, hard look at your marketing budgets. Now, your marketing budgets might be, whatever is on the credit card, or whoever runs the marketing department. That might be the CEO of a smaller company, or you might have a small team. But really take a closer look at the marketing budgets. They were geared at the beginning of this year to a very different world. So start looking at moving some of those marketing budgets towards things like what we're looking at today, webinars that allow people to look at things in their own, and view content in their own time. Sponsorship opportunities, community events. And by this, I mean, if you can sponsor a community event or take part in a community event, you start to get your name out there at a sort of grassroots level and build upwards. Now, there's some events that, for instance, and we can share the links to these later, but in the UK, some of the community focused events are things like 44Con, B-Sides, SteelCon, Security, which is up in Scotland. These are made by the community for the community. They're not InfoSec Europe. They're not massively commercial, but you will find people there from students of cybersecurity degrees all the way up to CISOs, hiring managers, etc. So becoming a part of that community will give you a very broad access to not only potential users and buyers of your product, but also future people who can join your workforce. The other thing to look at as well is, tapping the social media sides of things, video and blogging, etc. Again, this, content can be viewed at, in different ways currently. Look at your corporate and social responsibility programs. You can tie this back into community events. There's plenty of charitable community events out there, that support underrepresented sections of people. So, for instance, women in security, BAME, members of security, etc. Get involved in these, and that's again a great way of pushing your brand, but also engaging with the community. And also, when you're delivering any kind of presentation or video or blogging, or you're doing something at a community event, think of the education possibilities here. Not this is what our product does, our product is fabulous, it's better, etc. What, you know, all that sort of thing. Focus more on the problems that your product may well be solving, not what your product does. Focus on the bigger picture here. And this way you start to become a part of the community in a way that engenders huge amounts of trust. And also, let's be honest, it's good for the soul as well. The other element of this is to take advantage of the current flexible working. This was me just the other day before I shaved my beard for the presentation, but you don't know how much stock photography is. It's really expensive, so I try and use as much of my own as possible. But people are working very differently right now. They're working, you know, they may be essentially on the clock for 12 to 15 hours a day, but in between a phone call, they're taking classes for kids, or they're doing some Keep Fit or something like that. You can gear your content and the way you communicate to people around this. People are consuming content, your advertising, your marketing in different ways. Just a somewhat maybe benign example is creating 5 3-minute pieces of content that can be timed with somebody's workout. Sounds bizarre, but it's a great way of actually engaging with people as human beings in their current environment. You're acknowledging that this is an odd situation, and here's what we can do about it. So understand that your audience is not just available for 45 minutes between 12 and 12:45 while they have a sandwich and watching a webinar. Design your content to be viewed both live and offline and in different formats, be that written, audio, or video, etc. There's very, very different ways to look at your content to be delivered. The other element as well that you can take advantage of is understanding that best practice as we understand it is evolving. And I'll give you an example. So best practice for any kind of remote working 6 months ago was, if you didn't have MFA, multi-factor authentication, when people were remoting in, you were an idiot, without a shadow of a doubt. 3 months later, that whole paradigm was shattered because organizations simply had to scale at levels that they had never seen before. Therefore, 2FA or MFA was switched off in order to allow them to scale. That's best practice in that environment. That doesn't mean that we can't go back and review it, etc. But when you are looking at your marketing and when you're looking at your pitching and talking to CISOs, etc., best practice as you understand it may be very different to best practice as they understand it. Understanding where they are in that journey, where they are in what's actually happening in their environments specifically, is going to help you present your tools and your products in a way that's going to help them, rather than help them make them feel like you're talking down to them. So we're at the halfway mark. This is where I take another glug of coffee. So inside the mind of the CISO, it's a fairly terrifying place, I have to tell you. But I think understanding who the CISO is and the kind of pressures that they're under is very important to understanding how you can sell to them. So this ostensibly is the mind of a CISO. It kind of goes blank many times, and that was a joke, by the way. But just trying to see if everybody's still awake. So yeah, the inside of to see inside the mind of a CISO, I think, is to see something like this. Now, I always enjoy finding good artwork on stock artwork, etc. When I saw the description of this, I knew before it that actually this sums up what a CISO is. The CISO is a man looking at a mailbox overloaded with junk emails. I know this, and other people I've spoken to have told me this. The moment that you put the letters CISO after your name in LinkedIn is the moment you lose control of your inbox. It's sad but true. And so the most fundamental thing I think I can tell anybody on this webinar about, how do you approach a CISO is understand that you are in competition against a lot of very loud and obnoxious people. Everybody on this call, accepted, of course. They will use any and every method that they can to get hold of you. Just to give you a story here, just a few weeks ago, I think it was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I took a phone call from somebody who phoned me up to tell me that they had found a vulnerability in the Publicis Groupe environment and that they needed to escalate it to someone. I obviously very politely told them hadn't worked there for about 18 months, but I can certainly pass on the message, and which he agreed to. I spoke to my successor at Publicis Groupe, and this guy literally sighed and said, he's been trying to sell me a product that I told him I don't need for the last 4 or 5 months. And now he's resorted to calling people who used to work here. So that's a company that goes into my little black book of people that I would never work with in the future. Don't be those people. Don't be the people that start your emails or your introductory statements along the lines of, you are at risk, COVID-19 has broken your organization, or any other variations like that. If you're using fear, uncertainty, and doubt as a way of attracting attention and a way of trying to sell your product, 99.99% of CISOs will immediately file that in the bin, in the round filing cabinet, because it just joins all of the others. So again, just be aware that this is a very crowded marketplace from a CISO's perspective. Part of that, again, is because the CISO has grown from both a technical and a non-technical role. So they're getting both sides of the equation. They're getting the technology resellers, they're getting the the business sellers coming to them. And in many cases, it's just simply not relevant. The other element to understand, and a CISO will always tell you this, is that whatever your marketing department tells you, your product, your solution is not a silver bullet. That's not to say that it isn't an excellent product, but trying to sell it as a silver bullet, trying to sell it as this will get rid of all of X woes that you have had is, bluntly a lie. If your product was the silver bullet, you would have no other competitors. It's as simple as that. And let's face it, we've all got competitors out there. Hearing this time after time is a guaranteed way of turning a CISO off to your product. And I think it's a really important part of this to show how your product is a part of the larger ecosystem in which we as CISOs operate in. Now, if it's a larger, multifaceted product, of course, it's going to do a very, very broad range of things here, but it is not going to fix everything perfectly. And I think the more that we as vendors recognize this, the better we will be, the better we will be as vendors and sellers of our products. Now, I'm not going to read this quote out. I'll leave this to you to read, but it's a lovely quote from Dr. Ian Levy, who was a technical director of the NCSC and he was quoted in 2017. And he basically said that the way we talk to our customers is in such a way that we talk down to them. We basically say to them, you're too stupid to understand the problem, that only I can help. This ties into that silver bullet concept. If you buy my product, my magic amulet, my lucky rabbit's foot, etc., you'll be fine. And he classes it quite simply as medieval witchcraft. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said behind this around, you know, organizations that are genuinely trying to sell their product, but doing so in a way that makes them come across as these, you know, these medieval witches and wizards trying to, you know, pat us on the head and tell us that everything's going to be okay. We need to communicate far better with our CISOs. And that can be summed up very briefly by saying, don't sell me a solution. What I'm looking for is for you to understand the problems that I'm facing and help me address them with your product. The way I put this is in other talks is I've said that, you know, I need you to help me sell more beer, not buy more security from you. And the reason I say that is, you know, when I say sell more beer, I say whatever product is that you're selling. I'm just thinking of a perfect CISO role in a brewery, to be honest with you. You know, help me sell more beer or widgets or cars or whatever, rather than just trying to sell me your blinking lights, you know, solution. My role as a CISO is not to make my organization the most secure in the world, because if I was to do that, my organization would go out of business in a few months to a year, because there would be no flexibility. It'd be secure, there'd be no data in and out, but there'd be no flexibility. I need you to, you know, I need to help my organization sell more stuff through the judicious use of security, of which you need to be a part of that. And that security is actually understanding, is there to help me address the security problems that I have, not to just sell me security solutions that end up on the shelf. And in fact, a colleague of mine, when he worked at the 451 group, a bunch of analysts, he did a report on shelfware. And actually, it's a shocking number. I think it was something like 24% of companies had bought security software that they had quite simply not even broken the seal on, because they were buying it, that they were being sold solutions and security solutions, not actually things to address the problems they face. Which brings me to priorities. I think there was a theme in the questions beforehand around what are the priorities of a CISO, and these are supposed to be slightly tongue-in-cheek, but frankly they're also fairly accurate. That, you know, being, you know, whatever the board wants. If the board thinks something's a priority, then it's my priority, and then it's whatever my boss thinks. If my boss thinks it's a priority, then it's a priority. And then maybe it's whatever the technical folks want, the CIO, the CTO, you know, if they think it's a priority, then it's mine. Finally, it's whatever I want to be a priority. But then I also have vendors telling me what I think should be a priority. People coming to me, like the vendor who phoned me up about Publicis Groupe, telling me that this should be a priority for Publicis Groupe, when actually the CISO within the group knew very well all of the circumstances, all of the context, that actually that was not a priority. So, you know, when you try and become a CISO's priority, or when you try and make the problem that your product addresses the priority of a CISO, you're actually going to lose, because there's a lot of other priorities ahead of you. If you actually instead try to understand what the business priorities are, you've got a much better understanding and a much better chance of being able to work out where your product will fit within the addressing of those problems. So if you get to know your CISO more and know their business more, you're going to understand their team, their board priorities, their problems, both business and technical. You're going to understand how they work, i.e. the context of where that problem is, and why for some companies problem A will be high risk, and other companies the exact same problem will be a low risk. You'll be able to understand the partnerships they have, and perhaps more importantly, their strategic and tactical goals. You know, if the product that you are looking to move into the market is focused on a strategic goal, but you're trying to sell it as a tactical product, you're probably going to fail, because there's a you know a clash of priorities there. So understanding their goals and how your product might fit in it realistically is going to be really important. Now, I can see all of you with your hands up in the air saying, that's all well and good, Tom, but you know, how do we actually get to communicate and talk to the CISO, talk to an organization, and understand all of these things? Well, I'm going to take you back a few slides and say, remember this one when I talked about redistributing marketing budgets? Well, what you actually need to do is, by doing these kinds of activities, you have amazing opportunities to talk to the CISOs, to talk to the technical architects, to talk to, you know, the people, the SOC analysts, the people across an organization, and actually understand what their problems are, which then subsequently allows you to pitch your products in ways that are not going to be seen as cynical, money grabbing, short-termism, etc., etc. So the tying of these two things together should give actually a very strong sort of financial indication, a financial connection. Finally, you really need to be agile, fast, and flexible, because if you're not, you get thrown into the strategic pile of vendors. You know, if you can't deliver now, especially in these current moments, they're going to move on to somebody who can. So again, back to that frictionless idea: be fast, flexible, be agile, remove all the friction to the purchasing challenges that you might face. The final sections, the last two slides of this are, you know, if I was to really, you know, do the 10,000-foot view of what the pre-COVID risks were versus the post-COVID, I think pre-COVID we had a perimeter. You know, many companies were flexible, etc., but the majority of companies had people who worked in offices at their desktops, and they had a fairly solid perimeter in which they understood that data stays in, baddies stay out. Data does not leave through, you know, through the gates. Yes, we were opening up, you know, ports here and there for certain flexibility, but it was effectively a, you know, a fairly solid perimeter that we're dealing with. Right now, and with the massive spike in home working, that perimeter has become more than just porous. It's become almost invisible, or almost you know, non-existent, because people are taking their work machines home to work at home, not work from home. That's a slightly different concept, but to work at home as if they were in the office. That brings a very, very different set of risks, ranging from BYOD, etc., you know, through to endpoint protection, and how much more important that is, the fact that there isn't a firewall that you have control over. Remember, I talked about how you know, new standards are coming to life, and you know, what is the new normal, etc. Well, BYOD is, you know, whilst there are many technical solutions to it, it was still very much a, yeah, but if it's not our device, we can't control it. Well, when 95% of your workforce is on their own phone, you're going to have to work out how to deal with it. You need to be up to date and to change your viewpoints on the risk, understanding that CISOs and their organizations are doing just that, and are going to be looking at the security models and at the security opportunities out there in a very different light. So final slide, I always say, you know, take at least one thing away with you from a talk like this. I'm going to give you three, so you can pick and choose. If you choose more, then fantastic. But, you know, first and foremost, I would say, don't use a crisis to sell or FUD or manipulation or doom and gloom. You'll get immediately discarded, and they'll probably laugh and tell their friends about you as well. understand business problems. Don't tell them what their security problems are. Understand what their business problems and how your product can help address those business problems. If you're telling people what their security issues are, you are at best running the risk of patronizing them as to their environment better than they do. And finally, be adaptable to the change that is happening. The market is shifting and priorities are shifting on a regular basis. If somebody has stopped talking to you because of what's going on, the lockdown, etc., that's probably because not that they've disliked your product anymore, but because their priorities have shifted dramatically. You can tie that back to the previous point about understanding what their new business challenges are, then all the better. You might be able to reinsert yourself back into that conversation. But CISO's priorities at best change regularly. Right now, they have changed massively. Thank you very much for listening. I believe we've still got time for some questions. I know I've prattled on a little longer than I promised to, but thank you for listening, and I hope you found it useful.
Thank you so much, Thom. That was really, really insightful. I certainly learned a lot, and I think, the points you made about, we now have to, buyers are consuming content in a different way, and it's all about digital, social. I think that was a really, really interesting point. And that actually brings me nicely on to the first question, which is from Colin Reid, who has asked, where is it gone? He has asked, sorry, I've got a few questions. Is social/digital media a good way to get a CISO's attention, or do you see it as brand building only?
I know I'm just sorry, excuse me. I know a lot of people, a lot of CISOs, a lot of very senior folks who use the social side of things a lot as a way of communicating. LinkedIn is the obvious one. I think even since lockdown, we're seeing that. So LinkedIn was always the more business platform anyway. And people would use it to build their brand, etc. But I think it's also now being used an awful lot to communicate with people around solutions and to make connections with people. For me, Twitter is similar as well. I use Twitter. 90% of my Twitter is professional use. It used to be 100%, but then, God damn it, I started to make friends out of some of these professionals, and so that's how we still communicate. But Twitter is actually very, very good for sharing ideas, for making points. I mean, I wish people would stop using those multi-threaded things to make a point. Just write a blog, not but anyway, but Twitter is a really good way of communicating. So I agree, it used to be about brand building, but I think now it's a way of really communicating more about your solutions, your how you're looking at business problems and how you're addressing them. Social media has very much grown up in the last sort of 5 years, I guess. 10 years ago it didn't really exist, but in the last 5 years it's dramatically grown up. And many companies I know, the company I gave the example of there, Canary, Thinks Canary, all of their advertising is either by word of mouth or through social media, and they are second to none.
Brilliant, good stuff, thank you. So we have another question that has come in from an Enterprise Ireland colleague, Porrick, who, thanks for the question, Porrick, who has asked about the sales cycle, which I think is quite interesting. Where is it gone? Is there a rough timeline from first getting in contact with the CISO to making a successful sale and implementing your solution to their company? How quick or slow moving should it ideally be?
Oh, you've really got to play that to the, however the CISO operates. As a CISO, I've turned things around in a couple of weeks because the time was right, the product was right, and we wanted to make it happen, through to something that took 12 to 18 months. And it wasn't like there was a massive difference in the value of product. It was 100,000 to, I don't know, 200,000, 250,000. It wasn't like it was a massively complex deal or anything like that. It's very much down to the individual CISOs. What I would say is my experience, and from talking to not only colleagues and peers but also clients, is that budget cycles are extraordinarily important. I think I hinted at that before. If you're getting to them at the beginning of their budget cycle, you're going to be probably easier to part them from their money than if it's, you know, towards the end of the year when they're trying to save money. So, you know, gone are the days when you have to spend budget in order to get the budget the following year. I think your budgets are just simply cut at the end of the day. The challenge is, of course, some people's budgets run January to December, others run from April to March, and everything in between. So very difficult. But you know, in my experience, it is down to the CISO and down to the environments. So terrible question. Sorry, terrible question. Terrible answer. My God. Terrible answer to a great question, but it's very difficult to, you know, to judge on something like that.
Okay, we have another one coming in from Tom Kennedy from CWSI. He says, great session. Wondering if there are any particular forums or publications that you would suggest that get the biggest CISO presence. And he has got another one as well. Have you ever engaged a vendor from the back of an advertisement / blog post? And if so, what was it that grabbed your attention?
So the first, I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Sorry, so the first one was, are there any forums or publications that you suggest has the biggest CISO presence?
There are some good ones out there. I particularly like, there's two of them that I like. One is ISMG, Information Security Management Group, and the other one is TICE, who effectively run a couple of, well, about 5 or 6 conferences a year, but they also have a you know, forum. They run same as ISMG. They do podcasts, videos, etc. Slight confession, I've worked with both of them, and I like them a lot, which is why I remember them. Both very professional, both have very good reporting, etc. And they both have some excellent high caliber guests, you know, of the CISO variety, and when they can't find them, they come to me. So they yeah, so check those two out. It'd be a great place to start. And then there's a variety of podcasts out there. I mean, you've got things like, you know, Smashing Security, for instance, great folks there. And they have all sorts of, you know, very senior people from the InfoSec world on there. I'm trying to think of a few others. The People Hacker. Yeah, and
I think maybe what we can do is when we're sending around the recording of this, we can kind of link a few, because you mentioned
a few things in there. Yeah, absolutely.
As well, so we can link those. Great. And the second question was, have you ever engaged a vendor from the back end of an advertisement / blog post, and if so, what was it that grabbed your attention? So again, I guess
on the back end of a blog post, no, not personally. I think when back as a CISO, many of the purchasing decisions were out of my hands in that sense. The reason I say that is I don't want to try and caveat this too much, but we separated security from IT in the sense that they were operational and we were strategic and governance based, so that we would say what we wanted them to do. How they did it was up to them, and they would make certain, and then they would decide what technology to use. So that when we came to audit them, they couldn't fail an audit based on a product that we had recommended. They'd fail an audit based on how they implemented their own product. So I haven't made any purchases like that myself. I'm just trying to think how I can elaborate, but I can't. But no, I haven't.
Okay. And then we'll have 2 more. So for security firms who primarily sell via partners and resellers, which is a lot of our clients would do that for the UK, what advice would you give about channel partners in the UK? So I guess kind of selecting that sort of ideal channel partner.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, channel partners and things like that are slightly out of my bailiwick. It's not something I'm particularly strong on. I would suggest, I think the only advice I give, and that's based on, you know, partnerships that I've built with my own company and partnerships that I've worked with in vendors elsewhere is finding the cultural fit. The technology will always work one way or the other. You know, find the cultural fit and the people who share your values as a business, because if your channel partners are into, you know, aggressive FUD-based marketing campaigns, that is going to tarnish your reputation as a, you know, as a quality, caring, community-focused organization, for instance. If your marketing methods are on that the more aggressive side, that's less of an issue, you know, and that's a choice you make, not one I would personally endorse. So more than anything, focus on the, you know, the cultural fit between the organizations. Outside of the financials and the recommendations, that I'm probably not qualified to say anything.
Okay. So if you were still in your role as global CISO, what cybersecurity risks would you be most worried about in the current environment, and has COVID changed your answer to?
The security risks that, as a CISO, that I was always most worried about were people. And I think I'm going to see one half of the audience here, you know, many fist pump in the air because they're in training and awareness and stuff, and the other half are in technology. So my personal opinion was that there was too much focus on the technology aspects of security and the installation of blinking light boxes and stuff like that, rather than actually helping, supporting and nurturing sort of advocates within the organization, you know, through people and addressing people and all, and addressing those cultural changes than anything else. I think since COVID, I actually think that has become a bigger challenge, because now they've moved outside of an environment in which I had some control over. They're now an environment where I have very little control over. Therefore, that person has even more leverage over the success or failure of my campaign, of my, you know, my information security program or campaign.
Good stuff. Okay, I mean, there's a few others, but I don't think we actually have time. I'm conscious that we're probably in between you and an evening lounging in the sun, so might wrap up there. But thank you so much, Thom. That was really, really insightful, really engaging, and really entertaining as well. So thank you for the hour. If any of you would like to, you know, have a follow-up conversation with Thom, happy to make that introduction offline, just let me know and we can take it from there. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. And when this webinar finishes, a survey will automatically pop up, which we'd really appreciate if you could fill in. It's just an internal Enterprise Ireland survey for us to get a better understanding of kind of the UK and in terms of importance of exports, the impact of COVID and Brexit, and any future kind of suggestions for UK cyber events going forward. Feel free to skip any questions you don't want to answer, but it would be great if you could fill in what you can. So thank you everyone very much, and thank you Thom for a great session, and we'll be sure to send around the recorded session and the few notes at the end in the next week.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you
folks.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.